Well, thank you very much, John, and what a wonderful experience it is to be here with so many responsible citizens. I've got the opportunity today to interview one of the people that we hope is going to make a difference over the next few years. Vivek Ramaswamy is an entrepreneur in the pharma area where he's been incredibly successful. He's been a political candidate. He ran for the Republican nomination in the most recent election in the United States. He's going to make an announcement, I believe, in a few days about his political future, and I invite you, Vivek, if you want to, you could make the announcement here and give us a scoop. And he's been an incredibly successful author. So welcome to ARC in London, Vivek. Are you there?
I am here. Can you hear and see me? Thank you for having me.
Vivek, I want to start off, if I could, by asking you about DEI. DEI has been an organising principle for the United States and indeed for much of the West over the last decade or two. It's not only been in government, it's been in the academy, it's been in business. You wrote a book called Woke Incorporated. And you basically said that businesses that were following the DEI agenda didn't really believe it. It was a bit of a scam and they were doing it to make money. Could you explain what that was all about?
Sure, and at the time I wrote this book, the types of comments I was making back then in 2020 were outside of the Overton window that I have to admit are now well within that Overton window now. So I'll maybe go to the heart of the matter, which is the debate about DEI is really not even about diversity or inclusion. In fact, part of what happened is in the name of diversity, capital D diversity, many organizations sacrificed true diversity of thought. In the name of inclusion, they created these new cultures of exclusion where certain points of view just weren't welcome. But what it was really about, and I got to the heart of this in my first book, Woke Inc., is that this is really a question about organizational mission. Every organization, when it loses its mission, it borrows an off-the-shelf mission from somewhere else. DEI, ESG, SGD, Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, whatever it may be, it's three-letter acronyms that substituted organizations that had their own loss of their own mission and purpose. And I think a vision of true diversity is one that recognizes that every organization, every institution, every company has its own distinctive purpose. And each organization requires different kinds of diversity to pursue that mission. A technology company may require mathematicians and programmers. It may require people who have skills in the humanities as well. I often made the joke, it's not a joke, I was serious about it, is that I would make for a poor employee at a steakhouse, even if I added diversity to its ranks, because I'm a vegetarian in my private life, because I don't believe in killing animals for myself for culinary pleasure. That would add even diversity of thought, but it would not advance the mission of the organization. And so I think what happened in the DEI arena is that was really just a symptom of so many organizations losing their own purpose that they started to pursue these flat, corporate, off-the-shelf, three-letter acronym purposes instead. And fortunately, I think that tide has now changed. I think that peak DEI and peak woke, I am pleased to say, is behind us. But that leaves our work cut out for us to say that it's up to organizations and nations to revive their true purpose, because if we don't, that still leaves a black hole and a void that DEI 2.0 is just going to fill instead.
Well, let me take you up on that. If corporations are going to give away DEI because the times are changing, does that mean we should expect corporations to adopt a MAGA-like agenda in the future?
I don't think so. I think that the heart of certainly my crusade and many in the Trump coalition's crusade against DEI was just to revive the base principles of merit. We shouldn't mix politics and business because they're in separate domains of life. That we should all be free in our capacity as private citizens to express ourselves without affecting our hiring prospects, which is part of what you saw in the US. People were fired for wearing the wrong hat or attending the wrong political rally. Certainly in the American context, that was un-American. We don't need to see a version of left-wing DEI replaced with right-wing DEI, or a new version of thinking that just because corporate boardrooms adopted left-wing policies, somehow we expect them to adopt conservative policies. I think what we really need to bring back is the truest form of capitalism itself. And Alexis de Tocqueville from your side of the pond was a great hero who traveled on our side of the pond about 160 odd years ago. He made an interesting observation about America in particular, that we're such a diverse and expansive country that this would fall apart, it would crumble unless we had these apolitical sanctuaries, what he called intermediary institutions, that were apolitical, where you could check your politics at the door and still work together in the baseball fields or the sports fields or the biotech labs or the manufacturing facilities, where you don't really care about what the politics is or the identity is of the person next to you, but you're bound in common purpose. That too is part of what pure capitalism offers. And so I speak for myself when I say this. I don't want to see capitalism corrupted by a left-wing influence. I don't want to see it corrupted by any other political influence either. It's a separate domain of life that is best left unto itself.
I think this is a very important insight, that not everything is political, that there are pieces of life that are completely outside politics. There's private conscience, there's corporations, there's sports, there's arts, that we don't have to have everything politicised, and the government doesn't have to be in every political or every personal space. Now, this brings me to my next question to you. We've had an era of big government, where government is expanded into all sorts of areas that it hasn't been in before. How do we rein this in? In the United States, the budget deficit is 6% of GDP. Now, when I did my first budget, I took 2% of GDP out of federal spending. If you were to take 6% out of federal spending in the United States, you'd be taking $1.04. I mean, can that be done?
So I'll answer two tracks of this question. First is there's a technocratic analysis of just the numbers, as you asked about. And then there's a more normative question about the question of who we really are and we're intended to be in the first place as a nation. But I'll address your question on the map first. So I go to Washington, D.C. from time to time. I'm in Ohio. And by the way, thank you for accommodating me this way. I didn't have a chance to say it. I have to be in Ohio. I'm going to be making a major announcement here in the coming days over the next week. But anyway, thank you for letting me join this.
They're asking you to make the announcement now, Vivek, if that's all right.
I think my colleagues at Grassroots in Ohio would appreciate me holding out till next Monday for that. But I appreciate that. But I will say that I travel to D.C. still from time to time, and I've been going there. I mean, I spent a good part of the last several months there. I will tell you that you could talk to congressmen about non-discretionary spending, that discretionary budgets, a lot of mumbo-jumbo. I'll start with just the basic question of cash accounting. How much cash went out the door, federal spending, in the year 2024? It was just shy of $7 trillion. Now I ask a second question, and a lot of people don't know this in the US, even in DC, they don't know the answer to this. How much did the federal government spend in this ancient ice age prehistoric period known as 2019? Okay, it wasn't that long ago. In 2019, that number was $4.5 trillion. So to those who say that cutting $2 trillion from the federal budget is a Herculean and impossibly difficult, mythical task of impossible proportion, I will say that that requires just rebaselining to 2019. That itself is a $2.5 trillion difference. And if we re-baseline to that, we're effectively on a path to a balanced budget in the United States, and therefore on a way out of our national debt crisis, which even if we have a path out of the beginnings of a path out of the national debt problem, that alone will be impounded into lower interest costs because 10-year Treasury yields will come down, which in turn brings down one of the largest line items on the federal budget, which is the interest payments on the federal debt, creating a virtuous cycle and a path out. So is going back to 2019 some sort of great feat of human history? I would argue there have been much greater feats accomplished in human history, including by the United States, including even the last century of the United States' history. We've done far greater things. Landing on the beaches of Normandy and winning World War II was a far greater feat than rebaselining from a 2024 budget to a 2019 budget.
Well, we wish you every success. Can I take you up on the federal debt question? Debt to GDP in the United States is 120%. I always argued when I was paying off federal debt in Australia that debt is just not an economic problem, it's a moral problem. That by running up debt, a society is consuming its resources on itself and sending the bill to the next generation. And young Americans, like young Brits, like young Australians, are all going to have worse opportunities because their predecessors have run up debts against them. Let me ask you this question. How much of that 120% of debt to GDP can be reduced? Should we worry that it's so so alarmingly large? Is this going to dislocate financial markets, or is there going to be a moral crusade against federal debt in the United States?
Well, I think those are intertwined. I think the technocratic crusade and the moral crusade are inseparable. You raise an important point. I mean, we started the discussion about DEI, where the E in that expression stands for equity. This is a form of intergenerational inequity. We're punting the problems to our kids and their generation. I'm a father of 2 sons. One of them is turning 5 this weekend. The other one is 2 years old. It's going to be on their shoulders that this problem falls unless we all step up and actually address it. Is it addressable? I think it is. As I said, if we re-baseline back to 2019 levels, the problem is solved. And I refuse to sit here in the year 2025 saying that somehow that's an impossibly difficult task. We got to think on the timescales of history rather than tomorrow. We've done greater things in our past, and I think we can accomplish this. As it relates to financial markets are surprisingly astute, surprisingly understanding. If there's even the beginnings of a path with some evidence of commitment articulated to how we're actually going to enter and embark on that path, that brings down 10-year Treasury rates, I believe, instantly, immediately, which has that cycle, because right now one of the items that's now in a downward spiral instead for us is the interest payments on the federal debt are themselves a growing and large line item of the federal budget, soon to be the largest line item. So I think we can turn that downward spiral into a virtuous circle. It will require some level of discipline. That relates to your second question about the moral crusade. People are capable of making a sacrifice. All of us are. You can make a sacrifice if you know what you are sacrificing for. And that gets back to the question of who are we and what's our purpose? The same comment I offered about companies that adopted 3-letter acronyms like DEI because they lost their way in their purpose. I think many Western nations, in the United States, let's be honest, over the last 4 years was no exception, have lost our sense of purpose and identity as well. That's the number one thing that Donald Trump, I believe, is restoring, and the number one reason I worked my tail off last year to make sure he was reelected, because I think he's reviving that sense of purpose and identity. What is the purpose of the federal government? I think the purpose of the federal government is to provide, first and foremost, for the national defense of its citizens, to have borders that protect the boundaries of its nation. And I think the purpose of government is to provide for its defense and to stand for private property rights. The irony is that in an era where the government has taken on a whole suite of tasks that go beyond that list, beyond what was contemplated by the founders of our country in the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, and have taken on a wide range of other functions in the modern nanny state of believing that individuals can't look after themselves, so the government has to do it instead, creating this culture of dependence on the government that creates that federal debt problem. It's precisely as the government has taken on responsibilities that it was never contemplated to actually take on, that it's done a poorer job of protecting the very things that it was intended to protect in the first place, like our own national borders, like our own national defense capabilities, like our own ability to even stand for private property rights. And so I think it all comes back to this question of the restoration of purpose and mission. Every country, every nation has its own identity. That's your North Star. Your government is built around constraints to be able to preserve the nation's commitment to its own North Star. And if we do that, the national debt problem, I think, more or less melts away automatically.
Well, it's a truism that the more government does, the worse it does. If it was doing its core business well, we wouldn't mind it expanding, but if it does its core business badly, why is there any reason to think it'll do its new business well? Now, we're running out of time here. We've got about a minute to go. I want you to imagine that you're making a pitch to people in America, and you've got a minute to make this pitch. Tell them how their lives will be better if federal spending is reduced, if debt is reduced, and if the government is curtailed. How will that make my life better?
Well, first of all of the waste, fraud, abuse, and overreach spent on things that you never authorized the government to do, that is your money, and it belongs back in your pocket. Put that in the investment account of your kids. Send it back from Washington, D.C. to the investment accounts of the next generation. Put that in the stock market for the next 10 to 20 years. They'll graduate with a 6-figure graduation gift. That's a far better use of money than what the federal government is squandering it on today. So starting with the waste, fraud, and abuse, which is where the first layer of cuts is occurring, that's a strict win for everyone. Beyond that, the way we're actually going to revive our culture, who we are, our self-confidence, is not through greater dependence on the government, but independence from it. We are not victims, we are victors. That is who we are. And I think the revival of that self-confidence, self-reliance, meritocracy, and hard work to achieve what we wish to achieve in America, rather than temporary dependence on the government, is what's going to allow our kids to live a better life than we did. That is the American dream. It's what we've lost for 4 years. That is what we are running to. And I think with the understanding of the people along the way, that it may not all be roses at every step. There'll be some small bumps along the way, but with an understanding and a patience for that, we understand that our best days as a country for our kids and their generation are still yet going to be ahead of us if we can have the discipline to do the right thing.
Well, Vivek, you've won a lot of supporters in this room, I think. We thank you for your time and we wish you all the best in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, guys. Thank you. It's an honor.